Welcome to Puro Politics, the political podcast of the San Antonio Express-News. My name is Gilbert Garcia, Metro columnist, and I'm joined by
City Hall reporter Joshua Fechter,
investigative reporter Brian Chasnoff.
And we're recording this on Monday, January 25th. Before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge the passing of a great American sports legend last week, Hank Aaron, who was not only one of the great baseball players of all time, but helped to played a key role in the integration of baseball in the South when he played in the minor leagues in the Southern Atlantic League in 1953. When Major League Baseball came to the Deep South, when the Braves moved to Atlanta, he was their star player and was really important in that. And also, he withstood tremendous racist vitriol when he began his chase to pass Babe Ruth for the career home run record. One bit of pop trivia that some of you may know, but some listeners might not know, is that the rapper MC Hammer got his nickname because in the mid-'70s, he was a bat boy for the Oakland A's, and people started noticing that he looked like a young Hank Aaron, and who was also known as Hammering Hank Aaron. And so they started calling MC Hammer Little Hammer, and the name stuck. So we have Hank Aaron to thank for that. People can decide.
Gilbert, I know who you're talking about, but do you think that most of our listeners even know who MC Hammer is?
Oh man, that is a really good question. What do you think, Josh?
Josh, do you know who MC Hammer is?
And to play in with the bit, I'm going to say no.
Okay,
I'll play.
I had a pair of Z Cavaricis in middle school, but I'm 42 years old. So
that's good to know. Well, yeah. Well, it just. You know what I mean? Maybe the Addams Family rap one would that be the one? Because Can't Touch This hasn't been played on the radio for a while. I don't think so. Anyway, I don't want to diminish Hank Aaron's importance by making too much of that, but that is a little trivia. We're going to move on to some local politics, and my sense is that this probably the biggest issue, or the issue that's kind of going to be hovering over our city council elections this year, is the issue of police reform. We've got a new round of collective bargaining that's tentatively supposed to begin on February 12th. We've also got an organization, Fix SAPD, that really they've got a petition drive. They want to repeal collective bargaining and also repeal state statute that covers civil service protections for public safety employees. So, Josh, you've been covering this. You also wrote a little bit last week about how where some of Fix SAPD's funding has been coming from. Where do things stand now in this whole issue of, we got collective bargaining happening on one track. On the other track, we've got an organization that's saying collective bargaining isn't working. We need to find another way to get to police reform.
And I was just sitting here thinking, man, have we even talked about police reform on the podcast since the beginning of the month? Just so much has happened.
I don't think we have.
Earlier this month, they turned in, Fix SAPD turned in, more than 20,000 signatures to get the ballot measure on the ballot that would repeal police unions' ability to collectively bargain. The city clerk is still working through all that. Around the same time, Chief McManus and the incoming leader of the police union, John Danny Diaz, basically appeared together, kind of tried to put up sort of like a united front. The police chief said he wasn't opposed to collective bargaining, putting him sort of, in stark sort of opposition, it's to the the ends of that campaign, and then last week, we saw, city councils kind of starting to lay out its priorities for collective bargaining. Now that, like the big sort of contentious topics of, how much, police officers pay into their health care, for example, are now kind of done and settled to, in the last collective bargaining agreement. You've got the city negotiators planning on, taking this time around to really address issues of discipline, issues that, the police chief and, city management have said, stand in the way of getting rid of, bad officers. And, to finally actually get around to what you were talking about before, sure. Because I was just like figuring out to wrap up all this stuff. Last week, we learned that Fix SAPD is pretty well funded. They've raised more than $300K, in the last couple of months of 2020. We also learned that most of that comes from a nonprofit that's run by the Texas Organizing Project, the progressive grassroots group. They gave $250K to Fix SAPD. And you can't really trace that money because the source of the funds is the Texas Organizing Project Education Fund, which is a 501c3, which generally does not have to disclose its donors. So so that was something I wrote about last week. So it's starting, and then at the same time, and as you wrote, Gilbert, you're starting to see council members come out against these petition drives, are actually starting to take more public stances on this. And last week, Councilman Manny Pelaez came out and said, he is opposed to the Fix SAPD, ballot amendments. What he says is that, and this is starting to become more of a talking point, is that everything that that we need to do, we can get done at the bargaining table when that starts next month.
Well, I think what's interesting about all this money that's coming into Fix SAPD, I think it's important because, they're trying the repeal effort when it comes to collective bargaining that's an easier lift. They needed about 20,000. We don't know if they got enough valid signatures to get this on the ballot, but they did apparently get more than 20,000 signatures. The drive to repeal Chapter 143, which covers civil service protections, that's about 80,000, which is a lot harder. It doesn't look like that's going to happen for the May election. And people wondered would they be able to do it at all with this kind of funding. I think it might change the calculus as far as whether they would have the resources to be able to get all those signatures. And it's really important, I think, because what happens is if Chapter 174, the collective bargaining statute, if that got repealed by San Antonio, then everything, we would basically revert to whatever is in Chapter 143. And when you collectively bargain, you can create provisions that supersede whatever is in Chapter 143. But if you do away with collective bargaining, then we revert back to that. And I think there is a concern, I think, among some people, even people who want to see police reform, that if we do away with collective bargaining, that it's in some ways it's taking away the city's ability to get rid of some of those provisions that are in Chapter 143.
Josh, do you think that this is a hard line being taken by the activists as a somewhat of a negotiating tactic, because they actually do believe that they could maybe pressure the union to make some concessions at the table?
That's an interesting question. I don't get the sense that that's what their aim is at all. I think they're sincere about getting rid of collective bargaining for the police union. I was talking to Michelle Tremillo of the Texas Organizing Project. And basically what she said, and it can be sort of, it can seem it appears to some folks, that that's kind of a contradictory stance for Texas Organizing Project to back something like this that's basically taking away workers' rights to collectively bargain for their wages, their health benefits, and all that. And what Michelle Tremillo told me and what was in the story was that, look, like, we think they should be able to collectively bargain for their wages and benefits, but we have a bunch of people on our side that say, look, like, you shouldn't be able to collectively bargain your way out of accountability for misconduct. So I think I feel like that seems to be like the best like crystallization of what I've seen. So I don't know that it could be considered a tactic. I think it's sincere.
It could have that effect.
Would the activists have any leverage over the negotiations? I guess not, right? This is probably their only way to influence the outcome.
Correct. But here's the thing: is if theoretically, and past negotiations aren't a good indicator of this. They tend to be sort of these long, sort of dragged out brawls that take years. But they have new incoming leadership, so there's hope that some of that would, among sort of like city officials, that it'll be a lot calmer this time around. But all of that is to say is that theoretically you could bang out a contract before you get before you go to the ballot in May. And that contract would last for however long the contract terms last for.
So it is. So it could be construed as a pressure tactic. Sure. In some way,
I think it could have that effect. I mean, I think you're right, Josh. That wasn't the intent, but I think it's putting a little more heat on the union. I think they were already, just with the climate in the country on police reform, I think that was already the case. It's interesting that Police Chief McManus seems to be somewhat supportive of continuing with the collective bargaining process and trying to change things that way. I mean, I think the big issues we've been hearing about are the fact that after 180 days after an incident, the police department no longer has the opportunity to discipline someone for a case. The fact that police officers tend to have 48 hours before they have to be questioned about an incident. One of the things that I think comes up a lot is the fact that when disciplinary cases go to mediators, the mediators have the right or the power to actually make the decision on the punishment. I think that the chief would be okay with them being able to make determinations on the facts, but he would like to have the power for the discipline, right?
Exactly.
And
I'm sorry, I just wanted to say that along those lines, because this is like a third track where we're seeing collective bargaining, we're seeing fixed SAPD, and then we've got Barbara Gervin Hawkins, who's been working with city staff on this to deal with some of these things in Chapter 143. It's to say, I'm going to change it on this front, regardless of whatever happens with collective bargaining or anything else. So she's got a bill that would deal with the 180-day rule and say 180 days after the police department finds out about an incident, that's when the clock starts. She also, I think, is going to address the issue of mediators, and she's going to have a bill dealing with that and the limiting the power of mediators. So this is operating on a lot of different levels right now. I'm sorry, Josh, what were you going to say?
No, that's what I was going to go into. But, specifically, I mean, you can sense that, city staff are starting to freak out a little bit about, the possibility that 174 does pass. So they're having to, sort of look and be like, okay, what's in 143? All right, we don't like this, we don't like that. Right. And so they're already, they're trying to figure out what their backup is.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk to Brian a little bit about a story that you did over the weekend, a really fascinating story about the tree ordinance. A lot of people will remember that in 2010, we had basically revised the tree ordinance in the city, and it was really kind of celebrated as a really important step. I think you had a lot of members of the council kind of working together at a solution on that, because it was a difficult process of putting that together. And you did a story over the weekend that really looked at the challenge in actually implementing this thing and how people have been getting around it. I mean, what did you find in reporting on the story?
Yeah, so the tree ordinance that passed in 2010 was in reaction really to a study that was done that showed that the overall tree canopy in San Antonio was gradually shrinking due to development. And so they strengthened the tree ordinance. And in theory, the ordinance is supposed to protect all heritage trees, which are the bigger old growth trees that you see, and then 35% of significant trees on any property. Of course, developers can remove more than that, but if they do that, they have to mitigate the loss by either paying fees or planting new trees. Now, the 2010 revision reduced the amount of trees that developers could remove and mitigate from 90 to 80%. However, and this is where the variances come in, there's still the opportunity for developers to request exceptions to this ordinance, to this rule. They have to go through either the planning commission or directly through the staff at development services at the city. And so my core finding in this story was that over the past 2 years, there have been 206 requests for variances, and the city granted all of them. And there's a range of the circumstances. There's a range of circumstances. Like it could be, I actually went through every single one of them, all 206, and I found exceptions. Somebody owns a residential lot. There's a tree on their lot. They want to cut it down to build a carport. Mm-hmm. That's kind of on one end of the spectrum. On the other end, hundreds of trees on, thousands of caliper inches of trees on hundreds of acres. There's a developer called Polte Group that's developing about 600 acres for more than 2,000 residential lots on land that's adjacent to Government Canyon on the, I guess that's the northwest side, in San Antonio's extraterritorial jurisdiction. And so on that side of it, you can see a large impact of trees being removed.
So it isn't, is it more a case of like loopholes in the law, or is it just the fact that development services, when these requests come to them, they're just accepting these exceptions? And is it in the letter of the law, or is it just the way the city staff is handling it?
It's both. It appears to be both. So I opened the story with an anecdote about Roland Gutierrez, who's a state senator now. What Roland got away with was not an official variance. He bought a residential lot that had a giant oak tree in the middle of it. And he wanted to cut it down without paying any penalties. So he apparently, according to some on-the-record sources I got, some folks who used to work at development services, he went downtown, was trying to find a way around it. Eventually, he found out he had vested rights on the property, meaning decades ago, a previous landowner had filed a plat, which kind of locked in the vested rights, and he didn't have to abide by any tree ordinance. However, he still needed to get a tree permit to cut down the tree, in part because the tree permit is part of the process to confirm the vested rights. I know we're kind of getting in the weeds here, but the upshot of that was he cut down the tree without a permit. He was assessed a $2,000 fine by the city. He called Michael Shannon, the director of development services, and complained, and Michael Shannon directed staff to waive the penalty. So that's an example, and that upset some folks inside the department. Yeah, and that's an example of an unofficial exception, perhaps an illustration of how permeable the department is to influence by developers who know who to call and who to talk to. There is this, what I was referring to before, the official variance process. That is official. That they can, if the developer justifies what Michael Shannon called a hardship, then the staff has the authority to decide whether or not to grant them the exception if it's a legitimate hardship. And one of the other things I found, though, in looking through all these documents, was often the quote unquote hardship was just pretty much amounted to I can't develop here unless I knock down all these trees because they're in my way. So.
Oh my God, this is a major. Have you heard anything from the city since the striking that?
No, but I'm gonna circle back and see what folks think about it.
I wanted to also ask you briefly about the issue of the COVID-19 vaccines, because you had a story about that as well, and I mean it seems pretty clear. I mean, I think communities across the country are struggling with the fact that the production of the vaccine is not keeping pace with the demand for it. But are there other issues that you found in terms of the administration or just the efficiency of the process that that's also causing a problem, or that could be changed to make this work better?
That's a good question. And I don't think we've uncovered anything like that yet, because the real issue is supply at the moment. I mean, according to the city, they have the capacity and the capability to double the amount of vaccinations that they administer at the Alamo Dome.
They're just waiting on them.
Yeah, they're waiting on the actual vaccine. And likewise at University Health, in a week or two, they'll be able to more than triple the amount of vaccinations they do, if only they could get the vaccine. So there seems to be a manufacturing issue, bottleneck, a production bottleneck seems to be the issue.
Yeah. Before we wrap things up, I want to talk a little bit about our city council races. We're a little less than 3 weeks away from the deadline for filing for council races, and there may be some surprises ahead. I mean, we have not yet seen Greg Brockhouse file for mayor, although I think we all know that's going to happen. But we can kind of see the races taking shape, and one of the ones that I've been really interested in is just District 2, because among the council incumbents, it looks like Jada Andrews Sullivan has got, just in terms of the volume of competition, she's got there are 8 people who file treasurer reports to run in District 2 against her. And I think what was really interesting, Josh, is just you've got Jalen McHugh Rodriguez, who's a 25-year-old math teacher at Madison High School. He served on Jada's staff for a short time and was really unhappy about the experience, left after about 5.5 months. And he has raised for a city council race, and given that he just got in this race a few weeks ago, raised quite a bit of money. I mean, would you say?
Yeah. It was honestly council races just don't first time council candidates don't tend to raise that much. At least in my experience, Jalen comes out and he gets, more than 400 donors, and raises about, more than $17,000, 17,600, I think it was. Yeah. And, by virtue, by contrast, Jada Andrews Sullivan, his former boss, raised, just about, $1,000 during that entire period. And not to mention just all of the folks who have sort of waded into the breach that are, sort of looking to take a shot at her. I mean, she's got a real race on her hands. I did not expect that to sort of be the dominant narrative of this race so far. I've maybe thought that it would be a little bit more defined along lines of, Jada and Farrell Clark, for example. But, this is going to be, I think, a pretty compelling sort of narrative in District 2, having, right. You mentioned that, the discontent, alleging basically that, as he told you, Jalen says that, he faced basically sort of like homophobia in that office. That's a pretty compelling thing to run on. I mean, it basically you're just. It sounds like right now you're sort of fighting to get into that number 2 slot in the runoff. That's if right. You're in that race.
I mean, it's an interesting race on a few levels. So you got, as you mentioned, Farrell Clark, who was a big part of the Black Lives Matter protests in San Antonio last year. You got Chrissy Villanueva, who's been on the VIA board. But I think Jalen, it's early, but I sense the kind of energy that we saw maybe with Ray Saldana in 2011 when he kind of came out of nowhere and ran for city council, or we saw with Ana Sandoval in 2017. Every now and then a candidate will come along and just seems to generate a lot of energy behind them. And as you said, Jalen, he's in that unique position because he can talk about what he saw. He helped to get her elected, and then said, while he was serving as her communications director, you had people on the staff trying to brief her about things. She was, he makes it sound like there was a competence issue, that she was not listening or reading what they were giving her, that she actually initially was supportive of a migrant detention center that was being proposed on the east side, and they had to try to talk her out of it. And as you said, her chief of staff, Lou Miller, it's been alleged by Jalen that he was really homophobic and verbally abusive to Jalen while he was there. And when Jalen brought it up to the councilwoman, according to him, he was moved out of the city hall office and was basically it sounds like they were almost pushing him to quit. So I think that situation is going to be really interesting to watch. And I think just the fact that he's been able to raise so much money so early, and you see, like, you can see some like young artists and some musical performers who are doing, trying to raise money for him. It's just, it's an interesting thing he's got going there. And I think that's going to be a race to watch.
Yeah, it's something that may be of note, and for me, it's hard to tell like how much people care about these sorts of things. But of that sort of 17,000 or so that he raised, there's a significant, like, I want to say it was about, I'm not good with percentages, but basically of that, 8,000 or so came from San Antonio, and the rest was from outside the city, outside of the state. So I don't know if that's going to be sort of a, something,
a talking point.
A talking point, or just like a mallet to hit him back with if you're one of his opponents. But I wonder to what degree people care about these things.
Yeah, and he grew up in various places because he was a military brat, and I know he mentioned he lived in Hawaii and Kentucky and some other places. So you do see some of the money coming from I think, apparently from people who've known him for a long time in these places where he grew up. So, but I think you're right. I think there's going to probably be the argument from the councilwoman from her campaign that he's being funded by people from out of the state, and don't let them decide the election for you. So it's going to be one to watch. So we're gonna wrap things up there. Thank you all for listening. We'll be back next week. Take care.